first explorers, if you will, came from Eastern Canada, for what is now Quebec, and they settled, in different parts of the province. If you look at the geography of Alberta and how, some cities are named, they're named after, some of the first settlers, De Leduc, Lacombe, Jean Côté, and different parts of the province. In Red Deer specifically, first settlers came here, and there was a Francophone community that grew on what is now the North Hill of Red Deer. At the time, it wasn't part of Red Deer, and that explains, the Montfort, for example, that was a convent. I came to Alberta in the early 1980s. I came to Red Deer in 1985. At the time, there had been a community, a Francophone community that had organized and then had folded. I'm not sure about the reasons for it, but the Francophone community kind of went, not necessarily underground, but there were very few people who would gather and be organized and organize activities for themselves. In the late 80s, there was a desire by the Francophones in Red Deer to have a Francophone school. That was a school that would not be a French immersion school. That kind of coincides a little bit with the beginning of the French immersion programs in Alberta. And Francophones didn't want to send their kids to a French immersion school because they wanted their children to be educated in French. So there was a core group of parents, if you will, who got together, and that led to the opening of École La Prairie in the early 1990s. The school, École La Prairie, opened, I think, in 1993, and it became the core of the Francophone community in Red Deer. And the Cercle Local that had been approved by the French Canadian Association was able to hire one part-time employee who would work 2.5 days a week. Initially, even that person was working as a volunteer, but we were able to get the space for very, very little money in the building where École La Prairie was based. The school was large enough, for those who've been in Red Deer for a long, long time may remember Piper Creek School. The school was large enough for the school itself, for École La Prairie, to take about 2/3 of the building, and then the other third of the building was left vacant. So we had the space there. The Cercle Local had the space there where we could hold our meetings, and every once in a while have some activities and try to attract people and grow the organization. One of the reasons why we wanted to grow the Cercle Local was because the Cercle Local is the first step with the French Canadian Association to become what is called a régional. And when you become a régional, the Cercle Local, the local group, has to reach 100 members and more. So once we get 100 members, I think for a period of 1 year, then the provincial organization approves the local organization to become a régional, which opens more doors to funding and support and enable the organization to plan more activities and whatnot. So I was a member of the board right from the beginning. I sat on the board for a number of years, and then through my work, I was working at Red Deer College at the time. Through my work, I was able to connect more members with the organization and the community. Also connect with French immersion schools and teachers in French immersion schools, because we were looking at broadening the scope of what we were doing to beyond the Francophone community, but also offer something to kids in French immersion programs that were outside the school, because there was also a notion among a few French immersion students that French was for school only, and there was no community life beyond that. So that was one of our purposes, which eventually led to, as the organization grew, we were able, to have a staff who was pretty much full-time. It became full-time eventually, and was able to organize larger and broader activities that enabled us to connect with the city of Red Deer, for example, and eventually launch our first winter carnival. The winter carnival that we have in Red Deer, as we know it now, has always been and is still an initiative of the French Canadian Association of Alberta, the Red Deer regional chapter. Highly successful event, and it attracts more than just Francophone community. It attracts people from all different walks of life in Red Deer. It's a fun activity. It's activities for the whole family. If you live in Edmonton or Calgary, you have way more resources available to you in French as opposed to Red Deer, for example, or smaller communities, right? So the challenge for the Francophone community in Red Deer is to find services that are currently available, and often people will be able to offer services in French, but they don't tell us that they are able to. So that's why the French Canadian Association here in Red Deer has gone to great lengths to try to connect with those people, and often the request will come from Francophones in Red Deer who just came here and often don't necessarily have all the language skills that they need in English to be able to function regularly, if you will. For example, if someone needs to go see a doctor and they cannot express themselves very well or clearly in English, it's probably better if they are served by a doctor who speaks French and understands French, as opposed to having to bring a translator with them, and then there's also privacy issues that come to that. And it's better now in Red Deer in terms of general services. I'm thinking, for example, a family doctor or a dentist. We've been able to find more and more who are able to accommodate the Francophone community. Sometimes we get requests for highly specialized services. For example, mental health. People looking for support in mental health who cannot access services in English because of the language barrier. And there aren't many of them already to serve the population in English, let alone finding those resources to accommodate French speaking. So as a result, there have been people coming to Canada initially in Quebec and end up in Red Deer in our region. The local chapter of the French Canadian Association, as it evolved, has been able to contribute to many different aspects of life in Red Deer. We have a mascot that shows up at different events in the community. The organization was getting requests to help with some events happening in Red Deer. For example, if we had a national or international event where French was required, the French Canadian Association would be asked to support in providing volunteers or some resources and whatnot. I'm thinking of events like the Memorial Cup, for example, that Red Deer hosted in 2016, where there was a need for a public address announcer, for example. So they turned to the French Canadian Association, for that kind of support. Same with the World Junior Championships that Red Deer hosted, the Linka Gretzky Cup some national events. I'm thinking about the women's midget hockey national tournament in 2015. When Red Deer was developing the bid for the Canada Winter Games, so 2019, we were approached in helping with things like translation, or how would the Francophone community be able to support the Canada Winter Games, particularly in the recruitment of volunteers, because there was a requirement with the Canada Winter Games that there had to be a minimum number of people or volunteers who would be bilingual. So our task became to be involved with the Official Languages Committee with the Canada Winter Games. The involvement itself during the game was phenomenal, because being a national event, there was a need for announcers and people, even people greeting the spectators and athletes from all over, and Francophones particularly. And we were even able to include during the games a day that was dedicated to the Francophonie. That was March 1st, and March in Canada is le mois de la Francophonie. So to launch the month, we had a special event during the Canada Winter Games to acknowledge le mois de la Francophonie. Often people in the community will be looking for resources in French, and they will more likely turn to the French Canadian Association. In the last 4 or 5 years, the French Canadian Association here in Red Deer has also tried to expand its role in supporting Francophone businesses and Francophone business people. So, for example, they organize events where they invite business people from different organizations to gather and give information on the services that they have or the product that they sell and whatnot, and connect with the Francophone community. The association right now, as it looks forward, is looking at eventually having its own space, to the point where we might be able to develop some kind of a Francophone cultural center in Red Deer. This is something that has been kind of on the radar for us for the last 4 or 5 years, I think. And that is continuing right now. There's always studies that are being looked at as the organization grows and the needs of the organizations change. We will eventually need a bigger space to accommodate our activities and support the community.
Apparently a few years ago, when as Bower Ponds developed around the Cronquist house, because it was at that time sitting in an abandoned quarry, there was talk that maybe this area would become an international village. That didn't happen. So in turn they created Bower Ponds. There was water there, I guess, from the river already, but they made it more man-made, I guess would be the word. And then it followed with the pavilion, where of course that's also leased out to a family now that's had it for quite a while. And there they have a little concession stand. They rent out paddle boats, canoes. They used to have those water balls that you could go inside. I'm not sure if they still do that. Very popular, so it draws a lot of people. And of course Bower Ponds are linked to the Waskesiu Park system, which of course Red Deer is famous for, because it goes from the north of Red Deer all the way to the south of Red Deer. So it's very popular for especially bikers and walkers, and so yeah, it's very. And then over the years it's become more of a sports area, We have, I think there's like 4 ball diamonds. There's a football field, and in the winter they freeze that over, and it's our new skating oval. But again, a lot of activities happen down. Today even, I think there's the Daw Run that's happening. So a lot of runs, for charity happen down here because it's just a great location and lots of parking. The Cronquist Tea House, as we call it, has certainly evolved over the years, and like I said before, we have sort of fine-tuned the menu to, sort of practice with what did work and what didn't work. And so now we have a very strong following. We have our regulars that come in, and then we're finding the regulars are bringing their visitors. And of course, most of them, use, order a tea for 1 or tea for 2, especially the British visitors. And that's really a test for us to see if they approve of what we're doing. But again, we just have so many people, it's every day there's somebody from somewhere just coming. And over the years, a lot of tea houses that were even local or surrounding areas have closed down. COVID, of course, forced a lot of them to close, and then they never did come back. The society, with its many different ethnic groups and other organizations that they are involved with that perhaps are not members, we also collaborate on many things. For instance, there was the recent Afro-Caribbean festival that happened in August. We were involved, we volunteered and helped as much as we could. We are other groups that they rent Festival Hall at a discounted rate because they're members, and so there's many activities that happen there that we also rent sport. And of course, we're seeing new groups all the time, such as the African Caribbean group that have become in such a few short years, they have really become very well known in the community, and lots of people have become involved. And again, there's other groups too that have come there. We now have an Afghanistan group, we have an Armenian group, and there's so many African countries that we don't have yet, but that are here in the city that we are hoping that they will join. And again, it's really we're kind of just flowing with what's happening in our city with the many immigrants and refugees that have come into the country, and again, just embracing all that they bring.
The cornerstone for St. Luke's Church building was laid in the fall of 1899. Construction began on the east end of the building, and the first section was completed in November of 1900. And there was a special service that celebrated the opening of this. My understanding is that they would curtain off the end of the building and actually hold services in the part that were built. Over the next 10 years or so, successive segments of the building were constructed, and construction was completed around 1910 with the addition of the bell tower. And services have been held continuously in this building since that time. Over the years, St. Luke's has been a part of the fabric of Red Deer. It has always offered a place of meeting for people and a place for the community to gather for various events, including musical events. And that's something that we continue to this day. It's a lovely building for its ambiance and its musical qualities as well, too. been a lot of different ministry over the years. In the early years, I would imagine it really focused on the work of the church within the community itself as being a sort of almost a social institution that the city depended on. Certainly times have changed. There's a lot of other churches and other organizations in town that fill that role. People's lives have changed too, and we don't do things the way that we did them 100 years ago, that's for sure. I know in the history of this church, people were sort of tied to it, families were tied to it. We still have families today who look back and remember their times coming together to this particular church, and are very happy to reflect on those days. So it must have been good times that they had here. There's really interesting old photographs that you can look at with choirs, both sort of junior choirs and senior choirs, all processing in their robes, and there's even some where I think they wore, some of them would have worn sort of mortarboards on their head, but certainly a change in the way that we do things these days. Still wear choir robes, but I guess headgear is optional these days. The church has always lended a hand to the community that it is a part of, and that tradition continues to this day. We look at what other people are doing in the community as means of reaching out and helping others, and we lend a hand to what they're doing often. It makes more sense to be of assistance to somebody like the Salvation Army when they're doing their Christmas campaigns, to be able to supply them with some people power to be able to do these things, or other agencies within town. So our people tend to be really busy through other agencies. They come here, they're fed and strengthened, and then sent out to do the work that they're called to in the world. Currently, one of the projects that we've been able to partner with is the Red Deer Dream Center, and we've had a group of people who worked very hard putting together crocheted blankets for people that'll be going through the programs at the Dream Center. A gift to them when they come, and something that they can take with them when they leave, but something that they can sort of wrap themselves in and know that somebody created something for them in love to be able to take with them into the world, and hopefully be able to share that love with others. One of the other projects that got us a little bit of press, I guess, over the last couple of years is what we called our Poppy Project. And that was a way of showing people who we remember on Remembrance Day, on November 11th, that we're still here, we know that they're still there, and that we care and we respect and honor the sacrifices that were made by people in the world wars. So we had a lot of the same people who did the blankets, or were part of that project, were involved in creating all these knitted and crocheted poppies, bright red things that we put on netting and hung down the walls of the bell tower of the church. And it was really quite striking. It's not up for long. The Legion has rules about how long poppies are to be worn. And so we consulted with them and made sure that they weren't up too early and they weren't up too long after Remembrance Day too. But the number of social media posts that we got, and how far and wide we heard that the photographs have been circulated were quite mind-boggling, actually. And it's good to know that something that's happening sort of down in the heart of Red Deer is making an impact, not only in Red Deer, but throughout the province, throughout the country, and even further away. So it's kind of neat to be part of something like that. What does the future hold for St. Luke's? Well, there's certainly challenges ahead. I don't think we're any different than any other church or other community organization in that regard. Pandemic was hard on community groups. We're primarily volunteer-based, and volunteerism in general took a real hit because of the pandemic. It's slowly returning, but we know that in terms of people who worship here on a regular basis, we're not back up to our pre-COVID numbers yet. And so we struggle in that sense. But we forge ahead and we make tough choices about what we're able to do and what we're able to not do. And that's probably a good thing to do every now and then anyhow, because it helps us to recognize that sometimes we stretch ourselves a little bit too thin, and a little bit of regrouping can help us to be more effective. There's an old saying that you should do better to do one thing well than many things poorly, and I think that pandemic gave us a bit of a reality check and has forced us to be able to go back and make some decisions about how we want to proceed. So, however, that being said, we know that much of whatever it is that we're called to do in the future will be based on reaching out to others and being of assistance where we can be. Is something that just seems natural to the people who congregate here. They're giving, lovely people, and they want to share their talents as widely, and in particular if it benefits others and helps other people to be able to thrive.